Kaylee, and this is my reading update for 30 books in 30 days this September. So today is day 7? Yeah, today is day 7. I don't even know what day it is anymore. Before we dive in to all the reading that I've been doing, I'm going to reach back here to our Booktuber Shoutout book, and we're going to shout out somebody randomly. Today's shout out goes to Books and Waffles. I will leave a link to their channel down in the description. Be sure to go over and subscribe to them. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to this channel and give this video a thumbs up if you have been enjoying all of your reading so far in September. So yesterday for day 6, I read a few more of the Kipling poems and a short story. I read The Church That Was at Antioch. This is kind of interesting because it takes actual historical Bible figures, Peter and Paul, and they are at Antioch, and all of the Christians there are having a big dispute over whether or not you have to keep to the Jewish law of not eating pork and not eating meat that has been sacrificed to idols and things like that, or whether Christians are no longer under the law. And a lot of this happens in Galatians in the Bible, and there's this big discussion about what is appropriate for Christians to eat. So this short story is actually told from the perspective of a Roman soldier who basically acts like a police officer in the city. And he's trying to figure out what are the Christians all about and like, why is there all this rioting over what they eat? So a lot of people are trying to blame the Christians for bad things that are happening in the city. And they're trying to stir up all this unrest and accuse Paul and Peter of being traitors to Caesar. So this basically police officer type person kind of gets involved in all of that, and he meets Peter and Paul, and stuff happens. As a devout Christian myself and a lifelong student of the Bible. My dad is a pastor. I've read the Bible many times, and I've read lots of commentary and books analyzing the Bible. And so seeing this fictional representation of actual historical Bible people, I'm just not sure how I felt about that. Peter just seemed like kind of bitter and downtrodden or something. And then Paul was like kind of bossy. I don't know, I couldn't quite make these personalities fit with the personalities of Peter and Paul that you see in scripture. It was definitely an interesting kind of exploration of that historical time period, and there's a lot of different people with different ideas. There's the Romans and then the Hebrews and then new Christians who are Greek or Hebrew. So it was definitely an interesting exploration of that time period. I'm just not sure that I liked it. And I'm not really sure what he was getting at. Like, it just kind of ended, and then that was it, and nothing was really resolved or finished. It was like, okay, I guess that was the end. So many of these short stories that I've been reading from Kipling, it's like I really like the writing style, and I like the premise of the story and the idea, and the characters are certainly interesting. And then just like, I don't know, the story structure isn't there. Like you don't really see a character arc. I don't know. I don't really know how I feel about that. I also read 3 more Rudyard Kipling poems. I read Pete. Yeah, I read Pete, Regular of the Line. I read The Return, All Arms. The only one that I really liked was Cities, Thrones, and Powers. A lot of his poetry is told in this like dialect almost, and it makes it kind of difficult to read. But Cities, Thrones, and Powers is just in regular plain English. It's all about how we look at the institutions around us, like cities and government powers, and we think, aha, that will last forever. That is permanent. But actually, in the sands of time and all of history, it's just one little blip in history. So I liked both the actual style of the poem, it's only like 3 stanzas, and I liked the message of the poem as well. And yesterday for day 6, I started reading The Pursuit of God. This is a very short little book. That's why I chose it for the readathon. It's only like 120 pages long, but there is so much good, just amazing theology packed in here, and it's so encouraging and inspirational. So I've been reading it like 5 pages at a time, and then I have to kind of stop and think about that and pray over it. So I think I'm going to take several days to read this one. I'm not going to try to read it all at once, although I could. I feel like I just need time to kind of digest everything that I'm reading. There's only 10 chapters, and at the end of each chapter, there's a little prayer that you can pray if you want to, which I think they're beautiful prayers. I've been praying them, and it's really lovely. So I think I'll just take 10 days and do a little bit each day and be able to say that prayer and kind of think about my spiritual journey and how this is helping bring me closer to God. I recommend this for everybody. You don't have to be a Christian to read this. This is inspirational for anyone. And then today, day 7, I started reading the first volume of Your Lie in April. I have read this series before, of course, and I've watched the anime before, so this is my second time diving in, and I'm only 30 pages in or something, and I'm already just like, oh my goodness, I love it. I'm already remembering things, and oh, I love this scene, and remember when they said that, and all kinds of lovely stuff. So I'm only a tiny bit of the way in, and I'm already just so excited, so loving it. Especially because this is about a boy who is a pianist. And then when his mother dies, he's grieving and has all these mixed up, upset feelings, and he doesn't play the piano anymore until he meets a young lady who is a violinist, and she needs a piano accompanist to help her, and she starts to kind of bring him out of his shell and everything. So today is Wednesday, and it's a really busy day for me on Wednesdays, but I'm hoping that by the end of the day, at bedtime, then I'll be able to dive into this and read some more. And I will be back tomorrow or the next day or whenever to update you on some more of my reading. So it is day 8. Today is the 8th, and I'm all caught up with my reading. It's only about 2 p.m. and I'm all caught up already for the day, and I'm gonna what am I gonna do for the rest of the day? I might try to read ahead a little bit just in case I get busy later on. Tomorrow, usually Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays, going into the weekend, are very busy. So since I have a little extra time today, I might just do some extra reading and get caught up for the weekend. But the reason that I'm so caught up anyway, is that I've been reading Your Lie in April. I've read volumes 1 and volume 2, and these are just so quick to read. Graphic novels, manga are just so easy to read. It just doesn't take a lot of your time, and I have been loving these. So I read most of volume 1 last night, and then I finished it up this morning. I just have so much love for this series. It's all about musicians. And of course, I have played piano and taught piano lessons for the last 20 years. I got my degree in music education. So anything having to do with music is just very near and dear to my heart. I really love how the musicians in this manga are portrayed. They are just full of love for their art form. They are full of creativity. They are sensitive to the beauty of nature around them. And our two main characters, our pianist and violinist, are just such wonderful, deep, complex characters. I love the whole gang of friends and all their individual stories. And of course, the artwork is incredibly beautiful. It's really lovely to see violin and piano instruments and the way that people hold their instruments and things actually portrayed correctly. It's so beautiful, and the artwork really tells the story so powerfully. So of course I gave this first volume 5 stars. So then this morning I went ahead and read through the second volume as well. In this first volume, our violinist here needs an accompanist, and she convinces him to accompany her in a violin competition. So then in the second volume, they go to the violin competition, and it is a complete disaster. But it's like he's taken his first step on this journey towards healing. And again, the artwork is so absolutely lovely. It's amazing to me how they capture this kind of nervous energy that you have when you're on stage as a musician. So you can see they're sweating and everything. In some ways, I love being on stage and playing in front of people and hoping that my music reaches them and touches their heart. But in other ways, it can be very nerve-wracking as well. So I have a special bookmark that I've been using while I'm reading these volumes. And it says, if I can get the ribbon out of the way, it says, "I heart music." And on the back it has a Jane Austen quote, "Without music, life would be a blank to me, which I think is actually kind of funny that people quote this, because this is actually said by Mrs. Elton in Jane Austen's Emma, and it's used to kind of make fun of Mrs. Elton because she's not a true lover of music. She just uses that to make herself seem more important. And so for many people, myself included, it really is true that without music, my life would be a blank, you know, but for Mrs. Elton, that is not true. So it's kind of taken out of context, but it is true of some people. So I still like this bookmark. I still enjoy it. So it's perfect to go along with my manga about musicians. I also gave the second volume 5 stars. I'll just give you some spoilers right now. Every single one of these volumes is going to be 5 stars. So, you know, just prepare yourself for that. I read another chapter in The Pursuit of God. So the first couple of chapters that I read were Following Hard After God, The Blessedness of Possessing Nothing, which is all about how if you have nothing but you have Christ, you're very rich. And then this third chapter that I read this morning was Removing the Veil. There's a veil between us and God, a veil of our sin. And Christ removes that veil so that we can have a close personal relationship with God. I am enjoying this so much. This is just like life-changing. It gives you such a different perspective on your relationship with God and what it really means to pursue God. And I just had one Rudyard Kipling poem to read today, and that was The Recall, which is about people who have been away from their homeland and now they are traveling back to their homeland. So it says, I am the land of their fathers. I will bring back my children. So it's really lovely just about the way that there's no other place on earth that quite captures your heart the way that your homeland does, the place of your forefathers, you know? It's very short. It's only like, 20 lines or something, but really, really meaningful. I liked that one. And that is all the reading that I have been doing so far for day 8. And I will be probably reading ahead a little bit for days 9 and 10. And I'll be back to tell you all about that. It is day 8, and I've just finished reading The Eye of Allah from my Rudyard Kipling books. So this short story is kind of like a historical fiction. It's all about these monks who are all into science and medicine and everything. And they get together, and one of them shows basically what's like a very early microscope. And they put a drop of dirty water under the microscope, and they can see all the little organisms and little, germs and little bits that are wiggling around inside that drop of water. So the crystal glass that they use, that crystal is known as the Eye of Allah. They found it down in Spain or something like that. So then the question is it like heresy? Or is it what they're seeing as demons in the water? And they just don't really know quite what they're looking at. But there's a medical priest, like one of the monks who's the medical guy, and he says, this is what I've been thinking all along, that there's some tiny little organisms, some tiny little animals that are getting into people's food or into their water, and that's what's making them sick. And they say, well, you might be right, but the church, the Catholic Church, will never accept that. And if you go around saying that, you're going to be burned at the stake for heresy. And they come to the conclusion, all 5 of these scientific people, they come to the conclusion that the world is just not ready to know about these things. And so they hush it up, they destroy the microscope, and they vow never to tell anyone about it. Which is just really, really tragic that the Catholic Church has this history of suppressing scientific knowledge. That just makes me so sad. So it was just really sad. It was just a really sad short story. And to see these very intellectual people who are being stifled by this organization that is over them, it was just really sad. And no wonder they're called the Dark Ages, right? So, yeah. But it was definitely good writing because it really made me care about these people and their discovery. And then I felt their grief because they're grieving that they can't share this with the world, and they're grieving that they're part of this organization that is keeping people in ignorance. So the writing was really good because it really made me feel emotionally something for those characters. Some of these Rudyard Kipling stories have been a little bit hit or miss for me, but that one was definitely interesting. So today is the 10th. I still have a lot of reading that I need to do later on today, but I do want to tell you about what I read yesterday. I read another chapter out of The Pursuit of God. This was chapter 4, Apprehending God. This chapter was all about how we tend to think of the material world as reality, and we tend to think of the spiritual world as more imaginative or something. So in this chapter, he goes into all the reasons why the spiritual world is just as real and even just as knowable as the material world. Just because you can't see something doesn't mean that it isn't there. And he talks about how our souls have the ability to perceive the spiritual world just the same way that our 5 senses of our body have the ways to perceive the material world. So I thought that was really, really interesting to dive into the nature of reality. It's not just what we perceive, it is what is. It is there whether you perceive it or not. So I really loved that this was more of an intellectual kind of chapter, delving into how can we know that spiritual things are true. I am just loving this book so much. Every chapter just blows my mind. It's fantastic. And I also finished volume 3 of Your Lie in April. In this volume, our main character is convinced to enter into a piano competition. And so this is all about how he's practicing and basically freaking out, and he's very nervous about preparing for this piano competition. And the volume ends where off they go to the competition, and in the next volume, we'll see him actually compete. I really love this volume because you see our group of friends really rallying around this pianist and encouraging him and supporting him and cheering him on as he is preparing for his piano competition. I just love this whole manga series so much. I'm enjoying it so much. It's just, it speaks to my musician's heart in a really special way. 5 stars, of course. And I also read another Kipling short story. This one was As Easy as ABC. So this is actually a dystopian short story set in the far future. This is set in 2065. It's frightening to think that that's really not that far away now. Really not that far away. But of course, for Rudyard Kipling, that was impossibly in the future. So the ABC stands for the Aerial Board of Control. And the idea is that if you control transportation, you control the world. You can basically control governments. And so pretty much the whole world is under this totalitarian regime, but there are some areas that still have their own autonomous governments. However, there is a huge fear in the world about ancient ideas, like crowds. Everyone is afraid of crowds. Crowds breed disease and sickness and unrest. And so there are very strict laws about procreating. There are very strict laws about how big of a family you can have. People live on like these isolated, huge areas of land. Even in the cities, people are all separated from each other. If you do gather together in groups of more than, say, maybe 40 or 50, then you can be prosecuted under the law for disturbing the peace with crowds. But then there are these dissenters who try to get people together in a crowd, and they all gather together to hear a speech about freedom and liberty. Well, then the mayor and the sheriff, they call in the ABC, the Aerial Board of Control, to manage these crowds and to arrest the instigators. And the ABC uses these futuristic weapons, and all it is light and sound. So I'm not going to tell you any more on that. You'll have to read the story for yourself to find out what happens to the evil dissenters. It was definitely very interesting world building, and the whole story is narrated from the perspective of the agents of the ABC. Basically, it's narrated from the perspective of the bad guys. And so you get to see how they have twisted these ideas of freedom and liberty into something grotesque and evil. To them, liberty is evil. So this is very cool, very imaginative. I mean, for the time period that it was written in, like, that was very clever. That was just genius. So I really enjoyed that. And then I also read a short poem, The Way Through the Woods. So it says, they shut the road through the woods 70 years ago, and weather and rain have undone it again. Now you would never know there was once a road through the wood. But then it says, yet if you enter the woods of a summer evening late, you will hear the beat of a horse's feet and the swish of a skirt in the dew, as though they perfectly knew the old lost road through the woods, but there is no road through the woods. So, ooh, I loved that. That was chilling. So you might hear people using the old road. But of course it's ghosts because there is no road. That was lovely. There's only 2 stanzas, but what a lovely poem. I only quoted a tiny bit of it just to give you the idea. There's a whole lot more in between that I didn't say because that would take too long. So that was all the reading that I did on day 9. Today is day 10 and I have not read anything yet. So I need to get going and get some reading done, and I'll be back later on today to tell you about today's reading. All right, I have finished the rest of my reading for day 10. I'm all caught up. I read another short story from Kipling called Mrs.Bathurst. So this is set in Cape Town, and it's all about these gentlemen in the Navy and the Marines, and they all get together for a pint, and they're talking about this lady who runs a hotel, and at different times they've all visited that town and they've seen her, Mrs. Bathurst. And they all really respect her, and they just think she's beautiful and she's so memorable. And then one of them starts saying, oh, did you know this guy from my ship is just crazy obsessed with her? And so he starts telling the other guys this story about this guy from the Navy who is obsessed and just basically just completely in love with Mrs. Bathurst. It was very weird and long and drawn out and kind of mysterious, but then like the mystery was never really solved. Like this guy who's obsessed with her apparently did something wrong or betrayed her in some way, like who knows, but we never really find out exactly what happened, but you can sort of guess what happened. So that was interesting. That was pretty weird. And then I read the poem Sir Richard's Song, which is all about a man in 1066 who has followed the Duke into war and is now dead. And he says that love is the first and death is the second, and love of England has taken me. So basically he died for love of his country. And that is all the Kipling that I've caught up with reading. I also read another chapter in The Pursuit of God. This last chapter was chapter 5, The Universal Presence. So it's all about how we are not aware of it, but God is present all the time. God is omnipresent. He is everywhere. There's nowhere that you can go to hide from God. But most of the time, we don't think about it. We don't think about God being with us all the time. And he says that if you really want to be close to God, you should pray that you will be more aware, more receptive to God's presence in your life. So I really enjoyed that chapter. And I finished reading volume 4 of Your Lie in April. This one introduces and kind of has more development for 2 of our other characters who are also pianists, and they are entering into the same piano competition with our main pianist character. They are extremely competitive. They're basically just there because they want to beat our main character. But they also really look up to him and they're really inspired by him. There's a recurring metaphor that he is kind of running ahead of them and they are following after him and trying to catch up to him as far as their piano skills and everything. And so they are simultaneously very inspired by him, but also they really hate him because he's always better than they are. So it's a really interesting, very tense dynamic between these characters. So of course, 5 stars. I love it. I love it so much. There's also some really, really beautiful artwork and some really beautiful scenes for pianists in this one. I love the way that they describe the music. They say her music is full of color. So things like that just really bring the story to life, and you can really see the impact that the music has on these musicians. And that is my update all the way up through day 10 of the 30 Books in 30 Days Readathon. Please leave me a comment down below and let me know, what have you been reading in the last few days? Are you all caught up and staying on track with your goals for the 30 Books in 30 Days Readathon? Or are you starting to fall a little bit behind, maybe? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and remember, the right book in the right hands at the right time can change the world.